SLS. The SBAS landing system provides an ILS lookalike HMI with vertical and lateral guidance mode for RNP approach with LPV minima. The concept of the SBAS is described on the figure. The reference ground stations in the area provides SBAS geostationary satellites constellation with the corrections and integrity parameters to apply to the GNSS position. The SBAS geostationary satellites transmit this information to the onboard avionics, that is multi-mode receiver. As described on figure, the multi-mode receiver computes the following parameters to support the SLS approach: a virtual beam from the final approach segment, FAS, data block, associated lateral and vertical deviations, based on the aircraft GNSS position with associated SBAS parameters compared to the track and slope components. To compute the virtual beam, the multi-mode receiver uses the final approach segment data block that is composed of the following parameters: runway threshold coordinates, anchor point, virtual beam slope, virtual beam track. The final approach segment data block are identified on charts by a dedicated channel, and coded in the NDB. The design automatically selects the channel via the FMS approach selection. The guidance laws are the same as those for an ILS approach, that is localizer and glide, slope. The SLS vertical beam relies on the augmented GNSS altitude when the approach modes are engaged, flight path angle, nav. For approaches without vertical requirements, RNP approach with LNAV minima, the FPA, nav mode is available. Nav mode is the lateral guidance. For the vertical guidance, the FPA mode can be used. Final AP approach and AP approach descent. The final AP approach mode provides the following components: a lateral guidance equivalent to the nav mode, a vertical guidance tracking the flight management system profile. For RNP approach in final approach segment, approach with LNAV minima. For approaches with nav minima, the flight crew can operate the following modes in the final segment: FPA, nav, or final APP or FMS landing system as advisory guidance. Even if the approach is operated with final APP or FMS landing system mode, vertically managed mode, the flight crew should monitor the vertical deviation with the checking of the altitudes and distances on step-down fixes, and not the checking of the vertical deviation or FLS glide slope deviation. Approach with nav minima. Final AP approach or FMS landing system can be used for approaches with LNAV, VNAV minima, depending on the option installed on the aircraft. FLS localizer and FLS glide slope guidance modes are provided, similar to localizer and glide slope, based on the flight management system virtual beam. Approach with localizer performance with vertical guidance, or localizer performance minima. Satellite landing system function is used for approaches with localizer performance with vertical guidance, or localizer performance minima, and localizer and glide slope guidance modes, or localizer only for localizer performance. Displays and monitoring of deviations to the flight path. For PBN operations, the aircraft navigation system enables the flight crew to monitor the guidance and deviations to the intended flight path. This section details all the ND and PFD indications for PBN operations. Cross-track deviation on ND. The ND provides the flight crew with numerical or non-numerical, left, right, indication on flight technical error, FTE, via the display of the cross-track deviation, XTK, refer to figure. Lateral deviation on PFD. The lateral deviation, LDEV, displayed on PFD enables to monitor the lateral guidance, flight technical error. The lateral deviation scale and index on the PFD provide a graphical display of current cross-track deviation, also displayed on ND, with an extended scale well adapted to the RNP operations below 0.3 nautical miles. The lateral deviation full-scale deviation is plus minus 0.2 nautical miles, 1 dot equals 0.1 nautical miles. The lateral deviation scale or index may be automatically inhibited in specific cases to ensure that it always corresponds to meaningful information. The lateral deviation function is mandatory for RNP operations with RNP values strictly below 0.3 nm. Vertical deviation on PFD, for RNP approach with LNAV, VNAV minima and RNP-AR, the vertical deviation displayed on the PFD enables to monitor the vertical guidance. The vertical deviation full-scale deviation is plus minus 200 feet, 1 dot equals 100 feet. The vertical deviation inhibits the usual vertical deviation indication used for normal descent management, that is a green arrow dot next to the altitude scale. SBAS landing system and FMS landing system deviation on PFD. The SBAS landing system function provides an ILS lookalike HMI with same deviation indicators. For example, figure illustrates the display of SLS deviations on PFD. The FLS function provides an ILS lookalike HMI with similar deviation indicators. A double diamond is displayed, instead of single diamond, to highlight the difference with FLS and precision approaches. For example, figure illustrates the display of FLS deviations on PFD. With SLS and FLS functions, the flight crew monitors the lateral and vertical deviations as for an ILS approach. During RNP approach operations with LNAV, VNAV minima, the requirement on lateral deviation is linear, RNP value equals 0.3 nautical miles on the final leg. In FLS approach mode, FLS localizer deviation is angular. Therefore the deviation width depends on the distance to the threshold. As illustrated on figure, FLS localizer deviation of 1 dot corresponds to 0.3 nautical miles at 17 nautical miles from runway threshold. As long as FLS localizer deviation remains less than 1 dot and distance to the runway threshold is less than 17 nautical miles, the RNP requirement of 0.3 nautical miles is respected. During RNP approach operations with LPV minima, the requirement on lateral deviation is angular. Management of RNP-AR capability. The aircraft systems compute RNP-AR status in accordance with data provided by the systems that are involved in the RNP-AR function. The RNP-AR status reflects current aircraft capability to ensure RNP-AR monitoring in accordance with equipment availability and required navigation performance, accuracy and integrity. The RNP-AR capability function has three states. Normal state, aircraft has full RNP-AR capability, down to 0.1 nautical miles. That is equipment redundancy and navigation performance is ensured, or RNP-AR limited to 0.30, in the case of loss of equipment redundancy. In the absence of additional failure, the navigation performance is maintained, or RNP-AR capability lost, in the case of functional loss, loss of navigation performance or availability of RNP-AR function for a limited duration. Nevertheless, the aircraft systems provide the flight crew with guidance to safely extract the aircraft from the current procedure. When a system failure occurs that downgrades the RNP capability, an alert message is displayed on ICAM or ND. For example, figure illustrates the ICAM status in the case of RNP-AR limited to 0.30.